Good morning. That's my new favorite song, by the way. That's the first time I'd heard it, first service I heard it. Wow. It really sums up what we're talking today about our words and speaking with one another. I want to welcome those that are online as well here to our message today. Good to see everybody again. It's good to see you. Good to be back from Mexico. I love the weather there. Wasn't it nice? Like 80, so 1 o'clock on Tuesday, it was 83 degrees. And by that night, back in Boise, Idaho, it was 27. Woohoo! I was tasked with the job of bringing summer back. Many people told me that, but had a good time celebrating our 25th anniversary, and so exciting. Yes, we can clap for that. Yeah. I know that clapter is for Kristen, mainly. So, wow. Today, we are continuing our series, Foundation for Followers. Our goal is that we could condense this down into 8 to 10-minute sessions that we can have online, and anybody that comes to LifeSpring and becomes their home church, that they can go through these. And so today, we are not going to do a lot of academia, like understanding the Bible, where it came from and things like that. We're going to really talk about how we talk to one another here as a group of believers. Because we have people that are from all different church backgrounds. We have people from all different states in America, mainly in the Northwest or West, those states. We got people from all different backgrounds as family backgrounds. So the way we talk to one another in our marriages and our families, we learn when we get around other families, they talk differently. They deal with conflict differently. And so you throw all that into a body of believers, and it can be tough sometimes. So we thought we would spend this session talking about words matter. Our words matter. It's important that we talk to one another in ways that build one another up. We're going to use a lot of Proverbs. The Proverbs is filled with how we use our speech. The book of James tells us how we use our tongue. But Proverbs 18:21, I'm going to start with that one. The tongue can bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. I love to talk. Maybe you do too. Our words can either bring life, energy, encouragement, or they can bring death. They can bring despair. They can bring division. According to one preacher, the book of Proverbs has 150 different sayings about how we use our words. I try to read a proverb a day or a psalm a day, and Proverbs 12 was one of those just before going on vacation that I was just filled with. Your words can build people up or they can tear them down. Several years ago, I was at a gas station, I think in Ontario, and one of those Love gas stations, I think they were called Loves or something like that, and they had all these books, and I saw this one, and it says, when to speak up and when to shut up. And all the parents of little kids, the kids were like, oh, he said shut up, right? But this book is a Christian book filled with scriptures and great things to help us in our conversations. But in it, he said this about the importance of our words. He says, because of the misuse of spoken word, destinies have been derailed, disunity has replaced unity, nations have been destroyed. Our very lives, both physical and spiritual, depend on our ability and willingness to speak at the proper time. And by the same token, silence can bring pain, destruction, and the inevitable onslaught of sin. Or silence can allow time for God to do his healing power and time for God to grow people. Words matter. Words matter big time. Just as words can be used to tear down, words can also be used to build up. So the opposite of this is true. Words can bring healing and hope, and spoken at just the right time, they could be a healing balm to our souls. And we've felt both, haven't we? Haven't we? We felt that words that build us up. We've also felt words that tear us down. King David wrote the importance of words in Psalm 19:14. He says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer." David knew the importance of the things I think about. God, I hope that the things I'm meditating on are good and pure and true. And the things that come out of my mouth, I want them to be things that build up and not tear down. So I've divided this message into, first, the things that we say. How do we determine what to say? And then the second is when things are said to us, like how do we respond to that? Both sides of conversation. You see, as Christians, we have a responsibility of the words that come out of our mouths. Every word that comes out of our mouth, we're responsible for that. But we're also responsible for how we respond to people when they come to us. So let's start with, how do we determine what to say? Have you ever said something that you regret? Nobody. All right. After being married, I think only 3 months, I was in a store and I hadn't met a certain family at the church that day, and I was always loved to meet all the new people, and I'm like, I saw them at church, but I didn't get to meet them. So I ran over, and my new bride comes running over with me, and I introduce ourselves to him. I'm like, my name's Tim, and this is my wife. And I said a different name than my wife's name. Words are very important. The name I used was my last girlfriend's name before I got. We never really officially dated. It didn't matter. I used the wrong word. Now, come on. You too. Let's say I was just transparent and shared something, okay? But what about you, all right? You said something. Someone told me after first service, they're like, I didn't need elbows from both sides today. You know. Words really, really matter. The great thing about that story is, 25 years of marriage, the only person that tells that story is me. And that's amazing. James chapter 3, verse 2 says, we all stumble in many ways. And if anybody does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. If you keep the tongue in check, and you can be careful what you say, and you can control that, then the rest of you is no problem. Because the tongue is so fast with what it says. And we've all said things that we didn't want to say. And if you think you have not, you are deceived. Because in verse 8, it says in the same chapter, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. The only person that held their tongue and spoke out at the right times and didn't speak at the times he shouldn't speak was who? What was his name? Jesus. That's the answer. Jesus did it. He's the only one that held back. And some of the things he did say, wow, that was holding your tongue, Jesus? See, it doesn't mean that you're just passive and you never say the tough thing. It means that you understand that I will only speak what I feel God is telling me to speak. I'm not going to just speak according to the flesh. Part of the reason why it's really tough to guard the things that come out of our mouth is because the human brain can form a word and put it into a sentence in about 600 milliseconds. That's all it takes. It's super fast. And it comes out and you're like, yeah, I didn't want to say that name of that other person I dated, whatever it was. You've done that. You've said things that you didn't want to say, but it's because partly this brain is functioning too fast. It's the beauty about getting older. It starts slowing down. And when we become Christians and we become part of a church body, we have different rules when it comes to our mouth. We can't have the attitude of, sorry, filter's broken. Sorry, not sorry, right? But as a Christian, no. Everything we do and say is filtered through Jesus is my Lord. He's the boss of my life. That's in Acts chapter 2, verse 36 to 38. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord, boss, and Savior. So he's the boss of my whole life. He's the boss of what comes out of my mouth, and he is the filter by which I choose my words. So how do we determine what to say? I'm just gonna give you a list of questions that we can. Now, when I give you a list of questions, you're like, well, I don't have time for those questions. Like, communication's happening all the time. It's happening fast. Especially when they get a guy like Tim preaching, and he just keeps going, blah, 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 you know. It happens so quickly. So what I'm talking to you about today is more of like, this is what I think I'd like to say, and you think about it for a while. It's those things. See, the other things that just spew out, the only way to deal with that is really to just spend time with Jesus every day. Spend time in the Word every day. Because out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So I'm going to talk about something that maybe is a little bit actually easier in that it's that thing you've been thinking about saying to so-and-so. And here's some questions that we can go through. The first is, what do I want to say? Like just determining what you want to say before you actually say it. You get those emails sometimes. Someone has something to say to you, and they want an answer back, and it's not a very nice email, or you get frustrated, and you just start typing a response, blah, 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 blah. And before you hit send, you close it out, and you go home for the day, and you're like, I'll read that tomorrow, see how that sounds tomorrow. Here's what I'd like to say. So determining it first is really a good exercise. There's been many times where I come back the next day and I look at it, I'm like, whoa, I'm so glad I didn't send that yesterday. But determining what you want to say is the first, and perhaps this is one way to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. So first question, what do I want to say? Second question is, what's my motivation in saying what I want to say? This one's really hard because we all have a heart that deceives us. Okay? But at least asking the question, what's motivating this desire to say whatever I would want to say? Our motivation often comes from expectations that we have. So before you as a spouse go and talk to your spouse and you're gonna tell them what's on your mind, maybe a motivation behind it should first be determined. And maybe it's, well, my dad, husband to my mom, always did whatever. And maybe I'm going to spew this out towards my spouse because it's an expectation that I had growing up. That's what dads do. You know, dad always took care of the cars. Why aren't you fixing that car? Why are we spending the money on that? And why don't you just fix it? And this expectation, see, our words come oftentimes from expectations that we have. And if we're not careful, we put those expectations on others. My mother, she always took care of the finances. She always did the books. She always did the checking account. Why aren't you taking care of that? And, well, we got to slow down and go, where's this expectation coming from? It's really important. Are we married to change a person? Are we married to grow a person? Are we married to change them? I didn't say that quite right. Are we married to change the person? Or are we married to them to grow with them? There's a big difference. Because if you're married to change them, it's only such a matter of time that you first realize you can't change them. It's God that does the changing, changes the heart. But then you get so frustrated that it's not happening that you just give up. You're done. It wasn't a relationship to begin with. It was this, I'm going to change this person. Are you married to them to change them or to grow with the person? What's motivating you is oftentimes an expectation. It comes to that with our kids. You expect your kids that once they become teenagers to, now that they've been in your house for 12, 13 years, that they should always agree with you. They've been agreeing with you since they were 3 years old, 4 years old, because you demanded it. And your expectation, and so the words that come out of your mouth begin to reflect that. Not them as an individual, knowing that between the time they're 12 and about 20 years old, maybe 25, maybe 35, maybe 40, they are developing their own opinions and their own thoughts, and they're becoming their own person. And it's very natural for there to be, and fight fair, fights between age 12 and 18 and 20. But if your expectation is, you've always demanded it, they've always agreed with you, then those words that can begin to spew out of your mouth can be really hurtful for them to become their own person. What's motivating what we have to say? Maybe church expectations will motivate what you have to say. Well, my preacher back in so-and-so did this. My previous church did this. My previous elders did this. And it can motivate. All of a sudden, you got all these things to say to elders and preachers. And I was a youth minister in Oregon for 6 years and got engaged and married at that time and had our first Kayla, who was right here on the guitar. I'll embarrass her now. She does really good. Anyway. And we were going to leave there, and I was going to become senior minister, lead minister at 29 years old. That, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But at 29, and just before we left the church, one of the elders pulled my wife aside and said, "Now, Kristen, there will never be another church like Singing Hills." Now, why did he say that? This guy's like in his mid-60s. Is there any wisdom in him saying that? He said, there will never be another church like Singing Hills. And you know what? Such good advice, because there's never been a church like Singing Hills. I love LifeSpring. I love LifeSpring. It gets better and better. Every year it gets better and better. I love it. But you know what? You people aren't the same as the people in the other church. It's a different church. What good advice. He took our expectations of, it's got to be like this again, and he brought them down to reality. And it changed what came out of our mouths. We had been at this same Singing Hills church for quite a number of years, and the singles group at that church was about 35 to 40 young people. That's it was about our size of congregation, maybe a little bit bigger. Had 40, one day after we were all at the lead pastor's house, they all left and I'm hanging out with the preacher, and he looks at me and he's leaning on the banister of the stairs, and he goes, "You know, Tim," he goes, "man, this is great, isn't it?" He always said that. "This is great. Isn't this great?" You always wanted to agree with him. "This is great." "Yeah, it's great." He goes, "But this is just for a season, man. Because I've seen this, and when it happens, you just enjoy it. Because it'll pass." And sure enough, after we moved, we came back a couple years later to visit, and the group's like 8 to 10 people, different people. It was different. Because out of those 40, we had like 8 marriages. Like 5 couples went into full-time Christian service, but it was never the same. A wise person understands, oh, things change, and things are for a season. But if we hadn't been told that, the motivation by which things would come out of our mouth was these expectations that we had, and that we would push them wherever we went. Another question to ask when you're like, what do I want to say? Is it necessary to say? Is what I want to say really necessary? So just because we feel like we need to say it, and we feel like it's necessary, you're like, well, of course I think it's necessary. I want to say it. No. Just because you think it's necessary doesn't mean you should say it. If someone offends you, the Bible says in Matthew chapter 18, when someone offends you, you're to go to them and share it with them. Isn't that so much better than like gossiping or slandering? You know what so-and-so did to me? Let me tell you what they did to me. It's so much better to follow Matthew 18 and we go to the person. And so years back when I was younger, I'm like, I'm going to live that out. Someone offends me, I'm going to go talk to them. Well, I didn't understand, and what we try to teach here at LifeSpring is that there's this whole counsel of God. There's like a lot of verses about our speech. And Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11 says, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is to his glory to overlook an offense? Like, is it necessary that I go correct that person every time they've wronged me? Who wants to be around that? Have you been around that person? That like every time they got to bring you up every time. They catch you in all kinds of things that you've done wrong, and they're going to come talk to you. So that's why we got to slow down. Is it necessary for me to actually say that? This might be something that I need to overlook. Now, I'm not saying you overlook. People do the same thing to you over and over again. But slowing down to say, really, is it necessary to point out this fault every time? Also, is this necessary to say? Proverbs chapter 9, verse 8 says this: do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Part of your determination on is it necessary to say is kind of looking at the other person going, do I need to be saying this to this person? Are they even going to receive it? Do they even want any advice? Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 says, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. Proverbs is so I needed a balance. The Matthew 18, go talk to them, with Proverbs that says, maybe this is something I need to overlook. Maybe this is not good because this person's not going to respond well. They're not ready to hear what I'd like to share with them. So question, is it necessary? Next question is this: is it beneficial to say? We're like, of course it'd be beneficial. This 16-year-old needs to hear what I gotta say. Well, are they gonna really see it as beneficial? But you need to say some things that are hard and some things they're not ready for, absolutely. But we also need to be careful of always thinking it's beneficial. Like, can you imagine being a preacher's kid like me? Like I was a preacher's kid, like my kid's like, preaching at me all the time, Dad, stop, That's the way it can come across as a parent when you think everything you have to say is beneficial and it might not be the right thing to say. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 says this: let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace. I'm about to say something about the phone. Okay. That it may give grace to those who hear. The NIV says this: it says, only say that which is to build others up according to their needs, that it may benefit them. A lot of times when we're talking, we feel like we need to say something, we already think this will benefit. But have we put ourselves in their shoes? At this moment, is this a benefit for them right now? Or is it just making me feel better because I got it off my chest? And so we're slowing things down. How will they hear what I have to say? Will they see this as beneficial? Did they ask for my opinion or my advice? I've spent so many years, like sharing my thoughts, but nobody asked for my opinion. Do they really want my opinion? Will they take what I want to say the right way? Or are they going to take it differently? So will this be a benefit to those I'm saying it to? Here's another question. Who does this need to be said to? Sometimes, Matthew 18 says go to the person. That's a good thing. Sometimes it needs to be overlooked. Sometimes you don't go to the person because they're not wise themselves, and you're going to be casting pearls before swine. But sometimes since we can't take it to the person that we know we need to go to, we go to someone else. And we begin sharing that with them. And this goes back to motivation too. Do we do that to make ourselves feel better about what we thought we should say? And we gather people that agree with us. So who does it need to be said to? I remember the first couple of years of marriage, I'm like, we are going to share everything with one another, honey. We're always going to talk about everything. Everything. Is that always wise? I'm not talking about hiding things that are against God. I'm talking about always sharing about everything about your day. I'm learning that in ministry, for a long time, I would like, okay, honey, how was your day? And I share about my day. And what I realized is that my wife, like probably most wives, loves their husband and they're protective. And they're protective of the kids. So rather than just share everything that happened in the day, including names, because what would happen is that I had to begin asking myself this question. Does all this need to be said to my wife, and is it beneficial for my wife? You guys all have jobs, where like you're working with people that some are Christians and some are not. So your job's not as easy as mine. My job's easy because I work with all Christians, mostly. And all Christians always say the right things. So you may not understand this, but there's a lot of sarcasm there. Because we all stumble. We all stumble. So I had to begin asking, is this beneficial for my wife? To hear, I struggle with this person that brought this to my attention, was angry with this. Because how is my family now going to view the church? And how are they going to view you when they see you next time? Is it always wise to just spout everything out with our spouses? Or are some things we need to take to the Lord first? Are some things just, we don't need to be sharing that? Because you can stir up this hornet's nest in your family against another family in the church or another staff member, and all of a sudden you're fine because you blew off steam, but the rest of your family, they're ticked off at people in the church. The things I feel like I need to say, who do I say them to? You gotta be really careful. And so I've had to ask, will this benefit my spouse? Will this cause her to not like that person when they see them in church next time? Like, where's that go? And so you got to be really, really, really careful. Questions: does this need to be said to my spouse? Does this need to be shared with my small group? What's the purpose of me saying this? Is it to get some helps to better the situation, or is it just to vent? You see how this is so important when we gather people from all different families, all different church backgrounds, different states, and we gather them into a body of believers. We got to be really, really careful. Another question is this: am I the best person to say whatever I feel like I need to say? Am I the best person? I remember also when I was in my 20s, I didn't get married till I was 26, had my first kid when I was almost 27, and then had first child at 28. I didn't have the child, my wife did, but we both did. Anyway, and I remember I got strong opinions on parents. You're the boss. You're the boss. You're in charge. Like, if you just do this, this, and this right, your kids won't rebel. Woo, that was great thoughts in my head. And I thought them so much that I, at times, would correct other people's children. How's that working for you, Tim? Was I the right person to say that? Most of the time, no. You could be right, and you may not be the right person to say it. So slow down, slow your roll. Are you the right person to say this? Sometimes family members especially when they're not saved, they need others to speak into their lives. And I'm telling you, I love teenagers. I was a youth minister for 9 years. I didn't stop being a youth minister because I didn't love kids, but teenagers often need somebody besides their mom and dad speaking truth into their lives. You're like, but I've been telling them that for 2 years. Don't you love it, wives, when your husbands come home, from work or something, and then they talk to you about something they heard? They're like, man, I need to do that. And the wife's like, I've been telling you that for 15 years, and so says it, now you're all excited about doing it. It's because God uses other people. So before you spout what you feel like you need to say, ask the question, am I the one to say this? Another question, is this the right time to say it? Timing is everything. Have you ever worked with somebody that the only time they came and talked to you was when there was a problem? You're like, oh, they want to meet with me again. Sometimes the timing is just not right and you don't need to say it. Sometimes we need to refrain from speaking. Sometimes we need to do more praying about something than criticizing something. Then when God moves and we see things happening because we've prayed, perhaps it was in God's timing, not our own. See how important that is? Like, is this the right? Let me pray about that for a while. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says there's a time to be silent and a time to speak. When I was a junior high basketball coach at a public school in Colorado, they had a rule that if you're in the audience, you could not approach the coach before, during, or after the game. If you had a problem with the coach, you set up an appointment the next day through the school. Why'd they do that? Calm them down. Bad timing. Last question is, how will I say it? How will I say what I want to say? Even encouraging things could be surrounded by hurtful words. You know, that's a beautiful picture of you. I didn't recognize you at first. You know, I love how you just don't care what anybody thinks of you. Your Instagram makes you seem so fun. You're so charming when you make an effort. Or how about this one? Your house feels so cozy and lived in. How we say things are so important. So let's move on to this last part of this, and that's things that are said to us. How do we handle criticism? I was on lunch break years ago and was listening to the radio as I was driving back and forth from a place to get some food. And on the radio was this preacher talking about how to handle criticism. And it was so good that before I went back into the office, I pulled out a piece of paper and pen and I just jotted down the 4 points. I'm like, that is so good. I had no idea that in an hour and a half from then, an elder was coming in to talk to me about a critique he had of me. Here are the 4 points. Write them down if you can. First thing to do when somebody comes to you with a criticism is you thank the person for coming to you. Well, that's easy. Thank them. Number 2, ask some clarifying questions. Number 3, ask them if there are other things they need to bring to your attention. This is all before you respond, before you have any response. This is like doing the James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. These help. I mean, you might be inside burning up because you're asking these questions, but thank you for coming to see me today. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Can you clarify what you're saying so that I can get a context for that? And then are there other things that you'd like to bring to my attention? Proverbs 18:13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is to his folly and shame. Respond by thanking them and telling them you appreciate them coming directly to you. And the last one is, number 4, if they're willing, pray together. Hey, this thing you've brought to my attention, these things, can we pray together about that? Could you start and you pray for me? Because I know there are things that I need to work on. You pray for me and I'll pray for you. And all of a sudden, it just changes. It changes the atmosphere. And then when they're gone, ask yourself this question. You might have to say, I need to get some time to think about what you said and just digest it. And ask yourself, regardless of who spoke the criticism or how they spoke it, is there any truth in what was said? And after this elder came and talked to me, I had to go, oh. God used the one person that I'm like, I don't want to hear what he has to say. Of all the elders we had at that time, I'm like, I don't want it. I love our elders, but I don't get along with that one. And he had truth to speak into my life. Romans 14:11 says, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. We are given account for every word that comes out of our mouth. Consider Jesus. Jesus only said what his Father wanted him to say. John 12:49-50. Let me close with this story. Almost a year ago, I took a concealed weapons class. Learned a lot at this concealed weapons class. And it was interesting that, by the time you get done with the class, you're like, I don't know if I want to conceal a weapon and carry a weapon. It's super serious. And they said whenever you introduce a gun into a situation, first of all, it should be bad enough that you would use it. Otherwise, don't pull it out. But two, any bullets that fired from that gun, I don't care what you're doing, defending your family, defending a church member, wherever those bullets go, you are responsible for every one of those bullets. So if it misses the intended target, goes through a wall, you are responsible for every bullet. And I thought, that's my words. Everything that comes out of my mouth, I'm responsible for that. And I've said the wrong things, the wrong times. I've said the wrong things at the right times. No, I would still make it wrong. God help us. We want to be a family that loves one another, builds one another up, and grows together. But be careful with our words. Words matter.